The fluorescent hospital lights cast harsh shadows across my face as I stared at my phone screen, the numbers swimming before my eyes. 3 years of saving, 3 years of skipping dinners out, buying discount coffee, and working double shifts at the marketing firm, $45,000. Gone. Every single penny of my wedding fund had vanished while I lay unconscious on an operating table, fighting for my life after my appendix nearly burst. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the empty savings account, the sterile smell of the hospital room suddenly making me nauseous for reasons that had nothing to do with my recent surgery. Daniel, my fiancé, squeezed my shoulder gently, his own face pale with disbelief. We had planned everything so carefully. The Historic Overlook House was booked for next month. The caterer was expecting her deposit. The dress was hanging in my closet, still wrapped in protective plastic, but what made my blood run cold wasn't just the missing money. It was the transaction history that painted a picture so devastating, so calculated, that I could barely process it. 5 separate withdrawals over the course of the week I'd been hospitalized. Each one authorized with my brother Marcus's emergency access to my accounts, the same access I'd granted him years ago when we still trusted each other with our lives. Marcus Thompson, my older brother by 3 years, the same person who had held my hand through our parents' messy divorce when I was 16. The brother who had taught me to drive in the parking lot of the defunct shopping mall, who had walked me to school every day when kids were bullying me in 7th grade. The brother who had just stolen my entire future while I was unconscious, fighting for my life. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was how perfectly he had orchestrated it. Marcus knew exactly when the surgeries were scheduled. He knew about the complications that kept me sedated longer than expected. He knew Daniel would be beside himself with worry, too distracted to monitor bank accounts. My brother had weaponized my medical emergency, turning my vulnerability into his opportunity. I discovered the theft on a Tuesday morning, exactly 8 days after my emergency appendectomy had gone sideways. What should have been a routine procedure had turned into a nightmare when my appendix ruptured during surgery, sending infection throughout my abdomen. Dr. Angela Rivera had warned Daniel that the next 48 hours would be critical. I had drifted in and out of consciousness for nearly a week, my body fighting an infection that could have killed me. During those crucial days when my life hung in the balance, Marcus had been busy. While Daniel held vigil by my hospital bed, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and surviving on vending machine food, my brother had systematically drained the account we had worked so hard to build. The timing was so precise, so calculated, that it couldn't possibly have been spontaneous. This was planned. The first withdrawal happened on Wednesday, the day after my surgery, when the doctors still weren't sure if I would pull through. $10,000, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The second came on Friday, another $10,000. By the following Tuesday, when I finally woke up clear-headed enough to think about anything beyond the pain medication, my entire future had been redistributed without my knowledge or consent. Daniel helped me sit up straighter in the hospital bed, adjusting the pillows behind me as I continued scrolling through the devastating evidence. His jaw was clenched tight, and I could see the vein in his temple that always appeared when he was furious but trying to stay calm. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 18 months. Daniel Martinez was the steadiest person I knew, a civil engineer who approached problems with methodical precision, but even his legendary patience was being tested by what we were discovering. Kate Foster, my best friend since college, arrived within an hour of my panicked phone call. She swept into the hospital room like a force of nature, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and her eyes blazing with protective fury. Kate had never particularly liked Marcus, always claiming he was too self-centered and manipulative. I had dismissed her concerns as jealousy over sibling closeness. Now staring at my empty bank account, I realized she had seen something I had been too trusting to recognize. "Rachel, honey," Kate said, settling into the chair Daniel had vacated for her. "We need to call the police. This is theft, plain and simple." She took my phone and began documenting everything with the efficiency of someone who worked in digital forensics. Kate had always been the practical one in our friendship, the person who read the fine print and kept receipts for everything. Now her skills were focused on unraveling my brother's betrayal. But I wasn't ready for police involvement yet. Some naive part of me still hoped there was an explanation. Maybe Marcus had borrowed the money for an emergency. Maybe he had gotten confused about the accounts. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation that would restore my faith in the person who had once been my closest family member. I needed to confront him first, to give him the opportunity to explain himself before I destroyed what was left of our relationship. Daniel disagreed. His engineering mind saw the situation in black and white terms. Marcus had stolen money that didn't belong to him. The amount constituted grand theft. The timing made it particularly cruel. There was no gray area to explore, no benefit of the doubt to extend. But he also understood my need for answers, my desperate hope that somehow this could be resolved without completely destroying our family. The phone call to arrange a meeting with Marcus was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I had been released from the hospital that morning, still weak and moving carefully to protect my healing incisions. Marcus sounded genuinely concerned when I called, asking about my recovery and expressing relief that I was finally home. His voice carried no hint of guilt, no acknowledgement of what he had done. Either my brother was a better actor than I had ever imagined, or he genuinely believed he had done nothing wrong. "I need to see you," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you come to my apartment this evening? Daniel will be here too." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I wondered if he could hear the strain in my voice, if some part of him knew why I was calling. "Of course," Marcus replied. "I've been wanting to check on you anyway. Mom and Dad send their love. They've been worried sick." The casual mention of our parents made my stomach clench. Did they know what Marcus had done? Were they part of this somehow? Our family had always been close-knit, united against the world after weathering our parents' bitter divorce and the subsequent financial struggles that had shaped our childhood. Linda and Robert Thompson had divorced when I was 16 and Marcus was 19. The split had been acrimonious, involving accusations of infidelity and bitter fights over the construction company our father had built from nothing. In the end, Dad had kept the business while Mom received the house and a settlement that barely lasted 2 years. The divorce had left all of us emotionally scarred and financially insecure. Marcus and I had clung to each other during those difficult years, promising we would never let money come between us the way it had destroyed our parents' marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me now. Here we were 15 years later, and money had once again shattered our family bonds. But this time it wasn't external circumstances or incompatible personalities that had driven the wedge between us. This time it was deliberate theft, a conscious decision by my brother to prioritize his own needs over mine, to exploit my vulnerability for his personal gain. As evening approached, I found myself pacing around my Pearl District apartment despite the discomfort from my recent surgery. Daniel had prepared tea and arranged the bank statements on our dining table like evidence in a criminal trial. Kate had offered to stay for moral support, but I had declined. This confrontation needed to happen between family members first. If Marcus could provide a reasonable explanation, if he could show remorse and make immediate plans for restitution, maybe we could salvage something from this disaster. The apartment felt different somehow, tainted by the knowledge of what had been taken from it. This was the space where Daniel and I had spent countless evenings planning our wedding, spreading venue brochures across the coffee table and debating flower arrangements. The kitchen had been our command center for managing deposits and vendor communications. Now it felt like a crime scene, the place where my dreams had been systematically dismantled while I fought for my life in a hospital room across town. Marcus arrived exactly on time, carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing the sheepish smile he had used to charm his way out of trouble since we were children. He was tall and broad-shouldered like our father, with the kind of easy confidence that had always made him popular with friends and successful in business. But tonight, looking at him standing in my doorway with those flowers, all I could see was a stranger who had betrayed me in the cruelest possible way. "How are you feeling, Ruck?" he asked, using the childhood nickname that now sounded like mockery. "You look a lot better than when I saw you in the hospital last week." He hugged me gently, careful of my healing incisions, and for a moment I almost forgot why he was there. This was still my big brother, the person who had protected me from playground bullies and taught me to change a tire. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Daniel shook Marcus's hand with barely concealed hostility. "We need to talk to you about something important," he said, gesturing toward the dining table where the bank statements waited like evidence in a trial. "Please sit down." Marcus looked between us, his smile fading as he registered the tension in the room. Some part of him had to know what was coming. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from me. You both look so serious." He was still maintaining his innocent facade, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his hands fidgeted with the edge of the table. My brother had always been a terrible liar, despite his attempts at manipulation over the years. I had just been too trusting to recognize the signs. I slid the bank statements across the table, watching his face as he processed what he was seeing. The color drained from his cheeks, and his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. There was no confusion in his expression, no surprise at seeing the evidence of the withdrawals, just the look of someone who had been caught red-handed and was calculating his next move. "Marcus," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "While I was in the hospital, unconscious and fighting for my life, you stole my entire wedding fund. $45,000. 3 years of savings. Gone." The words hung in the air between us, like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Once spoken, they changed everything. My brother's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: shock, guilt, fear, and then something that looked almost like relief. As if he had been carrying this burden and was almost glad it was finally out in the open. But what he said next shattered any remaining hope I had for reconciliation. "I didn't steal anything, Rachel."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"I borrowed it. There's a difference." His voice was defensive, with an edge of righteous indignation that made my blood boil. "I had an emergency, the house payment was due, and Stephanie was threatening to leave if we lost it. I knew you'd understand once you were feeling better." The casual way he minimized what he had done, the complete lack of remorse in his voice, hit me harder than any physical blow could have. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. This was a calculated decision made by someone who felt entitled to my money, who saw my medical emergency as an opportunity rather than a crisis. My brother had convinced himself that his wants superseded my needs, that his relationship was more important than my wedding. Daniel leaned forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You emptied her account while she was unconscious. You knew she couldn't consent. You knew she would never have agreed to this. That's not borrowing, Marcus. That's theft." The legal implications of what Marcus had done were becoming clearer by the moment. This wasn't a family dispute that could be resolved with hurt feelings and eventual forgiveness. This was a crime. But Marcus wasn't finished defending himself. "Look, I'm family. We help each other out. Remember when Dad helped you with the down payment on this apartment? Remember when I co-signed your student loans when you couldn't get approved on your own? This is what families do." His voice was rising now, and I could see the familiar anger that had made him so difficult to deal with during our parents' divorce. Marcus had always believed the rules didn't apply to him, that his needs should take priority over everyone else's. The apartment fell silent, except for the sound of traffic from the street below. I stared at my brother, trying to reconcile the person sitting across from me with the one who had once stayed up all night helping me prepare for my college entrance exams. The Marcus I had loved and admired would never have done this. That person had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of stealing from his own sister while she lay fighting for her life. What I didn't tell him in that moment, what I couldn't bring myself to reveal just yet, was that his betrayal had awakened something in me, something calculating and strategic that I had inherited from our father, but had never needed to use before. Marcus had made a crucial mistake in his theft. He had assumed I was as helpless and trusting as I had always appeared to be. But growing up in the aftermath of our parents' bitter divorce had taught me lessons about self-protection that I had hoped never to use. Now sitting in my apartment with my empty bank account and my brother's pathetic justifications, I realized those lessons were about to become very relevant. The real story wasn't just about stolen money. It was about to become something much more complicated, much more devastating than Marcus could possibly imagine. Because while my brother thought he had taken advantage of a helpless sister, he had actually made an enemy of someone who had just learned she was capable of fighting back in ways that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. As Marcus continued his self-serving explanations, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I was going to be the architect of justice, and my brother was about to learn that some debts could never be repaid. The 3 weeks following my confrontation with Marcus passed in a deceptive calm that reminded me of the stillness before a thunderstorm. To everyone around me, I appeared to be processing the theft with remarkable grace. Daniel marveled at my composure during what should have been the most devastating period of my life. Kate worried that I was suppressing my emotions in an unhealthy way. My parents, who had finally learned about Marcus's actions, praised my maturity in handling such a difficult family situation. None of them suspected that my apparent acceptance was actually strategic planning. While they saw resignation, I was conducting reconnaissance. While they interpreted my quiet demeanor as grief, I was gathering intelligence. The lessons my father had inadvertently taught me during his bitter business disputes were finally finding their purpose. Robert Thompson had always said that the most dangerous opponent was the one who appeared defeated while secretly organizing their counterattack. My daily routine became a carefully choreographed performance. Each morning, I would wake up in my Pearl District apartment, make coffee with deliberate normalcy, and spend exactly 30 minutes reading emails and news articles. To any observer, I was a woman slowly rebuilding her life after betrayal. In reality, I was systematically documenting every aspect of Marcus's financial situation, mapping his vulnerabilities with the precision of a military strategist. The breakthrough came during what appeared to be a casual family dinner at our parents' house in Hillsdale. Mom had insisted on cooking my favorite meal, claiming she wanted to help me feel better after everything that had happened. Dad grumbled about Marcus's actions but maintained his usual stance of avoiding family drama whenever possible. The familiar dynamics of our childhood home felt surreal against the backdrop of what I now knew about my brother. Marcus arrived late, as always, with Stephanie Walsh clinging to his arm like a designer accessory. I had never particularly liked my brother's girlfriend, finding her materialistic and shallow, but I had always been polite for Marcus's sake. Now, watching her flaunt the diamond bracelet he had undoubtedly purchased with my stolen money, I felt a cold fury that I carefully concealed behind a pleasant smile. "Rachel looks so much better," Stephanie gushed, her voice carrying that false sweetness that some women use when they want to appear caring while actually being condescending. I was so worried when Marcus told me about the surgery complications. It must have been terrifying to wake up and find out about the wedding fund situation. Her choice of words was telling. She didn't call it theft or stealing, it was just a situation, as if my money had disappeared through some unfortunate natural disaster rather than deliberate criminal action. I smiled warmly at her, letting nothing show in my expression. "Thank you for your concern, Stephanie. It's been challenging, but I'm learning so much about resilience and priorities." My words were carefully chosen, designed to sound like personal growth rather than the veiled threat they actually represented. Sometimes the worst betrayals teach us the most valuable lessons about protecting ourselves. Dad carved the roast with military precision, his movements sharp and economical. Robert Thompson had built his construction company through a combination of skilled craftsmanship and shrewd business instincts. He had survived recessions, lawsuits, and divorce proceedings that would have destroyed weaker men. Now, watching him serve dinner while carefully avoiding eye contact with Marcus, I wondered how much he suspected about the larger implications of what his son had done. The conversation flowed around topics carefully selected to avoid any mention of money, weddings, or legal consequences. Mom discussed her latest volunteer work at the animal shelter. Dad complained about new building regulations affecting his projects. Marcus dominated the discussion with stories about his promotion at the architectural firm where he worked, apparently unaware that his bragging was providing me with valuable intelligence about his current income and professional standing. What my family didn't know was that I had spent the previous week conducting my own investigation into Marcus's financial situation. Kate's expertise in digital forensics had proven invaluable in ways she didn't fully understand. Under the guise of helping me process my emotional trauma, she had assisted me in gathering publicly available information about my brother's recent purchases and financial commitments. The picture that emerged was both revealing and damning. Marcus had indeed used my wedding fund as a down payment on his house in Beaverton, just as he had claimed. But what he hadn't mentioned was that the mortgage application had been submitted 2 weeks before my surgery. The timing proved that his theft had been premeditated, not the desperate emergency response he had portrayed. More importantly, the loan documents revealed something that would become crucial to my plans for justice. The house had been purchased under a complicated arrangement that involved our father's construction company as a co-signer. Marcus had convinced Dad to guarantee the loan by claiming he needed help establishing credit for a larger property. What Marcus hadn't realized was that this arrangement created legal vulnerabilities that an experienced businessman like our father would eventually discover. Dad's signature on those loan documents meant he was financially responsible if Marcus defaulted, but it also gave him certain rights regarding the property. During dessert, I casually mentioned that I had been meeting with lawyers to discuss my options regarding the theft. The statement was designed to seem like routine legal consultation, the kind of thing anyone might do after such a significant financial loss. But I watched carefully for reactions around the table, noting the way Marcus's hand tightened around his wine glass and how quickly Stephanie changed the subject to her upcoming birthday plans. "I'm sure everything will work out," Mom said with forced optimism, her voice carrying the strain of someone trying to hold her family together through sheer willpower. "Marcus has always been responsible about money. I'm confident he'll find a way to make this right." Her faith in her son was touching and naive, but it also revealed how little she understood about the person Marcus had become. Dad remained silent, but I caught him studying Marcus with the calculating expression he used when evaluating potential business problems. Robert Thompson had survived decades in construction by anticipating complications before they became crises. The way he watched Marcus throughout dinner suggested he was beginning to recognize patterns that concerned him. When Marcus excused himself to take a business call, Dad followed him into the garage under the pretense of showing him a new tool. Their conversation was muffled by the closed door, but I could hear the cadence of a serious discussion. Dad's voice carried the authoritative tone he used with subcontractors who had disappointed him. Marcus's responses sounded increasingly defensive. When they returned 20 minutes later, both men wore carefully neutral expressions that fooled no one. Something significant had been discussed, and neither of them was willing to share the details with the rest of the family. The drive home gave me time to process the evening's revelations. Daniel had noticed the undercurrents of tension but hadn't recognized their significance. He was still thinking like an engineer, focused on the obvious problem of the stolen money, rather than the complex web of relationships and vulnerabilities that surrounded it. I loved his straightforward approach to life, but this situation required a more sophisticated understanding of human psychology and financial manipulation. That night, I made a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of everyone involved. I called James Patterson, the family lawyer who had handled our parents' divorce years earlier. James was known for his discretion and his ability to navigate complicated family disputes without unnecessary public exposure. More importantly, he understood the Thompson family dynamics and the business relationships that connected us all. "Rachel," James said when I reached him at home, "I heard about your surgery. How are you recovering?" His voice carried genuine concern, but I could hear the professional interest underneath. James Patterson didn't receive many calls at 10 o'clock on weeknight unless something serious was developing. "I'm healing well, thank you. But I need to discuss a legal matter that's rather time-sensitive." I chose my words carefully, aware that this conversation would be documented and potentially referenced in future proceedings. It involves theft of a substantial amount of money and some complicated family business arrangements. The pause that followed was significant. James was undoubtedly connecting the dots between my call and the various Thompson family legal matters he had handled over the years. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to full professional mode. "I think we should meet in person to discuss this properly. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? And Rachel, you should know that if this involves Marcus, there may be some conflicts of interest we need to address carefully." His warning was precisely what I had hoped to hear. James Patterson's ethical standards were impeccable, which meant he would be obligated to disclose any information that might affect multiple clients. If he had been involved in the legal arrangements surrounding Marcus's house purchase, he would have to reveal those details or refer me to another attorney. Either outcome would serve my purposes perfectly. The next morning brought an unexpected development that accelerated my timeline significantly. Daniel answered our apartment phone while I was getting dressed for my meeting with James. The caller was Dr. Angela Rivera, my surgeon, with news about my insurance coverage that would prove to be another piece of the puzzle I was assembling. "The hospital billing department has been trying to reach you," Dr. Rivera explained. "There's been some confusion about your insurance claims. Apparently, someone called claiming to be your emergency contact and requested that all medical bills be sent to a different address. The billing office wants to verify the correct contact information before processing your claims." The implications hit me immediately. Marcus had not only stolen my wedding fund, but had also attempted to redirect my medical bills, presumably to prevent me from seeing the full extent of his access to my financial information. The emergency contact status he had abused to access my bank accounts had apparently extended to my medical records as well. This revelation transformed his actions from simple theft to identity fraud, a much more serious crime with federal implications. I thanked Dr. Rivera and immediately called Kate to share this development. Her reaction was immediate and furious. "Rachel, this is way beyond borrowing money from family. He's been systematically exploiting your medical emergency to commit multiple crimes. You need to document everything and contact the authorities immediately. But I wasn't ready for law enforcement involvement yet. The additional evidence of Marcus's crimes actually strengthened my position for the private resolution I was planning. Criminal charges would be permanent and public, destroying any chance of maintaining family relationships. What I had in mind was more surgical, more personally satisfying, and potentially more devastating to my brother's carefully constructed life. My meeting with James Patterson took place in his downtown office, a space that radiated old money respectability and professional competence. The walls were lined with law books and framed degrees, but what caught my attention were the family photographs on his desk. James had been married to the same woman for 35 years and had raised 3 children who had all become successful professionals. This was a man who understood the importance of family loyalty and the pain of betrayal within trusted relationships. I presented my case methodically, providing documentation of the theft, the timeline of events, and the evidence of fraudulent activity regarding my medical bills. James listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but mostly observing my demeanor, with the experienced eye of someone who had handled thousands of family disputes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with obvious reassessment. "Rachel, I have to say I'm impressed by your thoroughness and your composure," he said finally. "Most people in your situation would be too emotional to organize this kind of comprehensive case presentation. You've clearly inherited some of your father's strategic thinking abilities." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I also need to disclose that I did handle some of the legal work for Marcus's house purchase. The arrangement involved your father's company as a guarantor, which creates some interesting possibilities for resolution." This was exactly what I had hoped to hear. James's involvement in the house purchase meant he had intimate knowledge of the financial arrangements that made Marcus vulnerable. More importantly, his ethical obligations meant he would have to present any settlement proposals to all affected parties, including our father. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would involve the entire family and reveal the true extent of Marcus's betrayal. "What I'm about to propose," I continued, "is a private settlement that addresses not just the theft but also the broader pattern of fraudulent behavior. I want full restitution plus damages, but I also want something more important. I want my brother to understand that actions have consequences and that family loyalty cannot be taken for granted." James raised an eyebrow at my tone. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "I want Marcus to discover that the house he bought with my stolen money comes with obligations he never anticipated. I want him to learn that the financial arrangements he thought were so clever actually created vulnerabilities he never considered. And I want him to realize that the sister he thought was helpless actually inherited the same business instincts that built our family's success." The lawyer's expression shifted from professional interest to something approaching admiration. "You're talking about more than just recovering stolen money, aren't you? You want to restructure the entire family dynamic." "I want justice, James. Not just legal justice, but the kind of comprehensive consequences that will prevent this from ever happening again. Marcus needs to understand that betraying family trust comes with a price that goes far beyond simple restitution." As I outlined my proposal, I could see James mentally calculating the legal implications and family ramifications. What I was suggesting was technically possible and entirely legal, but it would require careful coordination and precise timing. It would also require the cooperation of my father, who would have to choose between protecting his son and supporting his daughter's demand for accountability. The next phase of my plan would test every relationship in our family and reveal character traits that had been hidden beneath years of polite interaction. Marcus thought he had stolen money from a helpless sister, but he was about to discover that he had actually declared war on someone who had been quietly learning the rules of engagement her entire life. When I left James Patterson's office that afternoon, I felt lighter than I had since waking up in the hospital 3 weeks earlier. The victim phase of this story was ending, and the strategist phase was about to begin. Marcus had made the crucial error of underestimating his opponent, and now he was going to learn that some lessons could only be taught through experience. The real confrontation hadn't even started yet, but I could already see how it would end. My brother had stolen my wedding fund while I fought for my life, but he was about to discover that he had also awakened something in me that he was completely unprepared to handle. The Thompson family was about to learn what happened when loyalty was betrayed and trust was weaponized. And Marcus was going to find out exactly who had been paying for his house all along. The formal meeting James Patterson orchestrated took place on a crisp October morning in his conference room, with autumn light filtering through tall windows that overlooked downtown Portland. The mahogany table gleamed under carefully positioned lamps, and legal documents were arranged with military precision across its surface. Everyone arrived precisely on time, as if some unspoken understanding had communicated the gravity of what was about to unfold. Marcus entered with Stephanie at his side, both of them dressed in what they clearly considered their most authoritative attire. My brother wore the charcoal suit he reserved for important client presentations, while Stephanie had chosen a burgundy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Their confident demeanor suggested they still believed this meeting was about negotiating terms for gradual repayment, perhaps with some family counseling thrown in to smooth over hurt feelings. Dad arrived alone, having left Mom at home with promises that this was just routine legal paperwork. Robert Thompson looked every inch the successful businessman in his navy blazer and perfectly knotted tie, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set in preparation for difficult news. James had briefed him about the scope of the meeting, but had been deliberately vague about the specific revelations that were coming. Daniel sat beside me, offering silent moral support while I arranged my own documents with deliberate care. Kate had helped me prepare a comprehensive presentation that would systematically dismantle every assumption my family had made about my character and capabilities. The woman they thought they knew was about to be replaced by someone far more formidable than any of them had imagined possible. James opened the meeting with standard legal formalities before turning to address the assembled group with professional gravity. We're here to discuss the unauthorized withdrawal of $45,000 from Rachel Thompson's savings account during her recent hospitalization. What began as a family dispute has evolved into something significantly more complex, involving multiple potential crimes and substantial financial liabilities. The word crimes landed in the room like a physical blow. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Stephanie's hand flew to her throat in an unconscious gesture of alarm. Dad's expression remained carefully neutral, but I saw his fingers tighten around the leather portfolio he had brought with him. The pleasant fiction that this was merely a family misunderstanding was already beginning to crumble. Marcus James continued, consulting his notes with theatrical precision. You've admitted to accessing Rachel's bank accounts using emergency contact privileges while she was unconscious following surgery. You withdrew the money in 5 separate transactions over the course of a week. Is this correct? His tone was professionally neutral, but the legal implications were unmistakable. My brother nodded reluctantly, his earlier confidence visibly deflating. Yes, but I explained to Rachel that it was an emergency loan. I needed the money for the house payment, and I knew she would understand once she was feeling better. We're family. We help each other. And did you have Rachel's explicit consent for these withdrawals? James pressed, making notes as he spoke. The question was purely rhetorical, designed to establish the criminal nature of Marcus's actions in front of witnesses. Everyone in the room knew the answer, but having it stated officially would become important for what followed. She was unconscious, Marcus replied defensively. I couldn't ask her permission, but I had emergency access to her accounts for exactly these kinds of situations. She gave me that access years ago when we trusted each other. The bitterness in his final words revealed his growing awareness that this meeting was not going to proceed as he had expected. I spoke for the first time since exchanging pleasantries, my voice calm and measured. Marcus is correct that I granted him emergency access to my accounts. However, that access was intended for medical emergencies affecting me, not financial emergencies affecting him. Using it to steal money for a house payment constitutes fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The clinical precision of my words clearly surprised everyone in the room except James, who had helped me rehearse this presentation. Stephanie leaned forward, her voice rising with indignation. Steal is such a harsh word, Rachel. Marcus was going to pay it back once his promotion bonus came through. You're making this sound like some kind of criminal conspiracy when it was just poor timing and miscommunication. Her defense of Marcus revealed how completely she misunderstood the situation she was facing. Speaking of criminal conspiracies, I said, sliding a folder across the table toward her. You might be interested in these records showing that someone also attempted to redirect my medical bills to prevent me from monitoring my financial exposure during recovery. The hospital billing department has documentation of phone calls made by someone claiming to be my authorized representative, requesting that all statements be sent to your address rather than mine. The color drained from Stephanie's face as she opened the folder and saw the phone records and billing department notes that proved her involvement in Marcus's scheme. What had seemed like a simple case of sibling theft was expanding into a coordinated effort to exploit my medical emergency for financial gain. The implications were devastating for both of them. Dad cleared his throat, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Rachel, I need to understand exactly what you're alleging here. Are you saying that Marcus and Stephanie planned this theft in advance? His voice carried the weight of someone beginning to grasp the true scope of his son's betrayal. Robert Thompson had built his business reputation on integrity and honest dealing. Having his family name associated with fraud would be professionally and personally catastrophic. Not exactly planned in advance, Dad, but certainly expanded beyond the original crime once they realized how much access Marcus had to my personal information. I activated my tablet and projected financial records onto the conference room screen with technology James had arranged for maximum dramatic impact. The initial theft happened during my surgery, but the attempts to cover it up and exploit additional vulnerabilities continued for weeks afterward. The projected timeline showed a pattern of escalating criminal behavior that transformed Marcus from an opportunistic thief into someone willing to systematically exploit his sister's medical crisis. Bank records, phone logs, and medical billing statements created an undeniable narrative of betrayal that went far beyond borrowing money from family. This was professional-level fraud committed against someone who had trusted him completely. Marcus stared at the evidence displayed on the screen, his face cycling through expressions of shock, fear, and desperate calculation. How did you get all this information? Some of these records should be private. You can't just investigate your own family like we're criminals. His objection revealed how completely he had underestimated my capabilities and resources. Actually, Marcus, most of this information was readily available once I knew what to look for. Kate Foster's background in digital forensics proved quite helpful in understanding how to document financial crimes properly. I gestured toward the screen where call logs showed repeated attempts to access my various accounts during my hospitalization. The beautiful thing about modern technology is how thoroughly it documents every interaction. James took control of the presentation, explaining the legal ramifications with the methodical precision of someone who had handled similar cases throughout his career. Under Oregon state law, unauthorized access to financial accounts constitutes identity theft, which carries penalties of up to 5 years in prison and substantial fines. The amount involved elevates this to grand theft, adding additional prison time. The attempts to manipulate medical billing records introduce federal fraud charges that could result in decades of incarceration. The room fell silent except for the sound of Stephanie's increasingly rapid breathing. Marcus sat frozen, apparently unable to process the magnitude of the consequences he was facing. Dad studied the projected evidence with the analytical focus he brought to complex construction problems, occasionally making notes in his leather portfolio. However, James continued. Rachel has specifically requested this meeting to explore alternative resolutions that might avoid criminal prosecution while still addressing the substantial harm that has been done. This was the moment I had been building toward, the pivot point where my apparent victimhood would transform into strategic dominance. I stood and walked to the projection screen, using a laser pointer to highlight specific sections of the financial records. Marcus used my stolen money as a down payment for his house in Beaverton. What he didn't realize was that this created a chain of legal vulnerabilities that extend far beyond simple theft. I clicked to the next slide, showing the loan documents that James had helped me obtain through perfectly legal channels. The mortgage application required a guarantor because Marcus's credit history wasn't sufficient for the loan amount he wanted. Dad's construction company co-signed the loan, creating joint liability for the debt. I watched my father's face as he began to understand the implications of what I was revealing. This means that if Marcus defaults on the loan, Dad's company becomes responsible for the full balance. The genius of Marcus's scheme was also its fatal weakness. By involving our father's business as a guarantor, he had created a situation where his financial irresponsibility could destroy the company that employed our entire extended family. Dad's construction business supported not just our immediate family but also several cousins, longtime employees, and their families. Marcus's selfishness threatened dozens of livelihoods. But here's the really interesting part, I continued, advancing to financial projections that Kate had helped me calculate. Based on Marcus's current salary and expenses, including the mortgage payment on his new house, he has virtually no disposable income for loan repayment. The promotion bonus Stephanie mentioned would cover perhaps 10% of what he stole from me. At his current financial trajectory, he'll default on the mortgage within 18 months, triggering Dad's liability for the full loan amount. Dad's face had gone pale as he processed the financial time bomb his son had created. Robert Thompson had spent 40 years building his construction company from nothing into a regional success story. The prospect of losing it all because of Marcus's theft and fraud was clearly devastating. When he spoke, his voice carried a coldness I had never heard directed at family members. Marcus, is what Rachel is saying accurate? Did you commit fraud that could destroy my business? The question hung in the air like an accusation that would define their relationship forever. This wasn't about stolen wedding money anymore. This was about the systematic destruction of everything our family had built across multiple generations. My brother looked desperately between his father and me, apparently searching for some escape from the trap that was closing around him. Dad, I never meant for any of this to affect the company. I thought I could pay Rachel back quickly and nobody would ever know. The house was supposed to be an investment that would help our whole family build wealth for the future. Using stolen money, I interjected quietly. Money you took while I was unconscious and fighting for my life. Money that Daniel and I had saved for 3 years to build our future together. You didn't invest in our family's future, Marcus. You gambled with it using resources that never belonged to you. Stephanie finally found her voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. What do you want from us, Rachel? Obviously, we'll pay back the money as quickly as possible. Marcus will take a second job if necessary. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Her plea revealed how completely she misunderstood the scope of the problem they were facing. What I want, I said, returning to my seat and facing the assembled group with calm determination, is justice. Not just financial restitution, but consequences that match the magnitude of the betrayal. I opened my own leather portfolio and distributed copies of a settlement proposal that James and I had crafted with careful attention to both legal requirements and psychological impact. Marcus will immediately transfer ownership of the Beaverton house to me as partial compensation for theft and fraud. He and Stephanie will vacate the property within 30 days and return to rental housing appropriate to their actual income level. Marcus will also surrender his position at the architectural firm and accept employment with Dad's construction company at an entry-level wage, with all earnings above basic living expenses going toward restitution until the full amount plus damages is repaid. The terms were harsh but not vindictive, designed to be achievable while ensuring that Marcus faced real consequences for his actions. More importantly, they would place him under direct supervision by our father, making future financial irresponsibility impossible while rebuilding the family trust he had shattered. The alternative, James added with professional neutrality, is criminal prosecution on multiple felony charges, civil forfeiture of assets, and probable bankruptcy for both Marcus personally and potentially the family construction business. Given the federal implications of the medical billing fraud, conviction would also result in permanent loss of professional licenses and unemployability in most fields requiring financial responsibility. Dad studied the settlement terms with the careful attention he gave to major construction contracts. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions under pressure. Marcus, you have exactly 1 minute to accept these terms or I withdraw the company's support entirely. That includes the loan guarantee, your employment prospects and any future financial assistance from family resources. The ultimatum was delivered with the finality of someone who had reached the end of their patience with excuses and justifications. Robert Thompson was choosing between his children, and he was choosing the one who had been victimized rather than the one who had done the victimizing. The moment represented a fundamental shift in family dynamics that would resonate for generations. Marcus looked around the room desperately, searching for allies or alternatives that simply didn't exist. Stephanie was crying silently, apparently realizing that the life they had built on stolen money was collapsing around them. Dad was checking his watch with obvious impatience. James was reviewing documents with professional detachment. I accept, Marcus said finally, his voice barely audible. I'll sign whatever you want me to sign. The defeat in his tone was absolute, but it also carried a note of relief that suggested some part of him was glad the deception was finally over. Living with the knowledge of what he had done had clearly been eating away at him more than anyone had realized. As James prepared the formal documents for signature, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but it came at the cost of relationships that could never be fully repaired. Marcus would learn from this experience, but our family would be forever changed by the choices he had made during my medical crisis. The signing ceremony proceeded in silence, each document representing another step away from the naive trust that had once defined our family relationship. When the final papers were notarized and filed, Marcus was no longer the successful architect living in suburban comfort. He was a convicted fraudster who had lost everything because he had been willing to steal from his sister while she fought for her life. But as devastating as the afternoon had been for Marcus and Stephanie, it represented something entirely different for me. The helpless victim who had woken up in a hospital bed to discover her wedding fund had been stolen was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that family loyalty required accountability, that trust had to be earned rather than assumed, and that justice sometimes required the complete restructuring of relationships that had been built on false foundations. The real revelation wasn't just that Marcus had stolen my money, it was that I had inherited the strategic thinking and business instincts necessary to hold him accountable in ways that would prevent future betrayals. My family had thought they knew who I was, but the medical crisis that Marcus had exploited had actually awakened capabilities that none of us had recognized before. As we left James Patterson's office that afternoon, the autumn air felt charged with possibility rather than loss. Marcus would face the consequences of his choices, but I would build something better from the wreckage of trust he had created. The house he had bought with my stolen money would become the foundation for my own financial independence, and the lessons learned from his betrayal would guide every relationship decision I made going forward. The story was far from over, but the power dynamics had shifted permanently. Marcus had thought he was stealing from a helpless sister, but he had actually declared war on someone who was just discovering her own capacity for strategic thinking and decisive action. The final chapters of this conflict would teach everyone involved that some people should never be underestimated, and that family bonds forged in adversity are ultimately stronger than those based on convenient assumptions. The 30 days Marcus and Stephanie had to vacate the Beaverton house passed with agonizing slowness, each day bringing fresh revelations about the depth of their financial irresponsibility. As the new owner of the property, I had legal access to utility records, maintenance requests, and HOA communications that painted a disturbing picture of how my stolen money had been squandered. They hadn't just used my wedding fund for a down payment, they had been living far beyond their means for months, accumulating debt that made their financial situation even more precarious than anyone had realized. The house itself was a testament to their poor judgment. Located in a subdivision that prioritized appearance over substance, it featured expensive finishes that required constant maintenance and an open floor plan that maximized visual impact while minimizing functional space. The monthly mortgage payment consumed nearly 60% of Marcus's income, leaving little room for the property taxes, insurance, and HOA fees that came with suburban homeownership. Even without considering restitution for the theft, their budget had been unsustainable from the beginning. Kate accompanied me for my first walkthrough of the property, her forensic eye-catching details that revealed the true extent of Marcus and Stephanie's financial desperation. Credit card offers littered the kitchen counter, many of them already opened and apparently used to fund their lifestyle. The garage contained expensive exercise equipment that still bore price tags, suggesting recent purchases made with money they didn't have. Every room told a story of people trying to project success while drowning in debt they couldn't manage. They were living like lottery winners. Kate observed, examining a receipt for designer furniture that cost more than most people's annual salary. No wonder Marcus was desperate enough to steal from his own sister. They had painted themselves into a financial corner with no legitimate way out. Her analysis confirmed what I had suspected during our legal confrontation. The theft hadn't been an impulsive decision made during a moment of panic. It had been the inevitable conclusion of months of reckless spending and financial mismanagement. Daniel joined us for the second walkthrough, bringing his engineer's perspective to assess the property's actual condition versus its superficial appeal. What he discovered was both enlightening and disturbing. The house had been built by a developer known for cutting corners, using the cheapest materials possible while maintaining an attractive facade. Foundation settling was already causing cracks in the walls. The HVAC system was undersized for the square footage. The roof would need replacement within 5 years. Marcus didn't just steal your money, Daniel said, running his hand along a wall, where paint was already beginning to peel. He used it to buy a liability that would have bankrupted him even if he had come by the down payment honestly. The irony was inescapable. My brother had destroyed our family relationships and committed multiple felonies to acquire a property that would have ruined him financially regardless of how he had funded it. The moving day arrived with all the drama I had anticipated. Marcus and Stephanie showed up with a rental truck that was too small for their accumulated possessions, forcing them to make multiple trips while neighbors watched their obvious distress with undisguised curiosity. Stephanie's tears were genuine, but they seemed focused more on the loss of status than on remorse for the crimes that had caused their downfall. She directed the movers, with the entitled attitude of someone who believed the world owed her the lifestyle she could no longer afford. Marcus worked in sullen silence, loading boxes with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had emotionally disconnected from the process. He avoided eye contact with me throughout the day, but I caught him staring at the house with an expression that mixed regret with resentment. Some part of him apparently still believed he was the victim in this situation, that his sister's demand for justice was somehow more unreasonable than his decision to steal her life savings while she fought for her life. Dad arrived in his work truck as the final load was being secured, ostensibly to ensure the process proceeded smoothly but actually to witness the practical consequences of his son's choices. Robert Thompson had built his construction company through decades of honest dealing and careful financial management. Watching Marcus lose everything because of fraud and theft was clearly devastating for him, but he also understood that accountability was necessary to prevent future destructions. "Son," Dad said as Marcus climbed into the truck's cab, "you start work Monday morning at 7 a.m. sharp. You'll be doing manual labor until you prove you can be trusted with responsibility again. The crew foreman will report directly to me about your attitude and work quality. This is your chance to rebuild your life the right way, but it's the only chance you're going to get." The finality in his voice was unmistakable. Robert Thompson was giving his son an opportunity for redemption, but it came with conditions that would fundamentally change Marcus's life. No more architectural work that fed his ego and provided status among peers. No more flexible schedule that allowed for long lunches and afternoon meetings with clients. No more financial independence that enabled poor decisions without immediate consequences. Marcus nodded without speaking, apparently recognizing that argument or negotiation was pointless. The legal settlement had stripped away his ability to make choices about his future. Every aspect of his life was now subject to oversight and approval by family members he had betrayed. The successful professional who had stolen my wedding fund was being replaced by someone who would have to earn back the most basic levels of trust and respect. Stephanie's farewell was more theatrical, involving dramatic declarations about starting over and building a better life together. But her performance was undermined by the obvious resentment in her voice and the way she glared at me when she thought nobody was watching. She had clearly convinced herself that I was the villain in this story, that my demand for justice was somehow more destructive than Marcus's original crimes. Her inability to accept responsibility suggested that their relationship would not survive the financial pressures and lifestyle changes that lay ahead. After they drove away, I stood in the driveway of my new house, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but it had come at the cost of family relationships that could never be fully repaired. The property represented both victory and loss, a tangible reminder of what happened when trust was betrayed and loyalty was weaponized for personal gain. The weeks that followed brought regular reports from Dad about Marcus's adjustment to his new circumstances. The transition from white-collar professional to construction laborer was proving more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Marcus arrived late repeatedly during his first week, apparently struggling to adapt to the early schedule and physical demands of manual labor. His attitude toward coworkers was condescending and entitled, reflecting his belief that the work was beneath his education and training. "He's not making friends," Dad reported during one of our weekly check-ins at the construction office. "The crew thinks he's arrogant and lazy. They've been doing this work their whole lives, and they don't appreciate someone treating it like temporary punishment instead of honest employment." The feedback revealed how completely Marcus misunderstood his situation. This wasn't a brief period of hardship before returning to his previous life. This was his new reality until he earned back the trust and respect he had forfeited through theft and fraud. The restitution payments began arriving monthly, drawn directly from Marcus's paycheck before he could access any of his earnings. The amounts were modest compared to what he had stolen, reflecting his dramatically reduced income and the basic living expenses that Dad insisted be covered first. At this rate, full repayment would take nearly 8 years, assuming Marcus remained employed and avoided additional financial mistakes. The extended timeline ensured that he would face daily reminders of his crimes for the foreseeable future. More interesting than the money was the psychological evolution I observed in my brother during family gatherings. The confident, successful professional who had stolen my wedding fund was being replaced by someone more humble and significantly more aware of consequences. Marcus spoke less and listened more during conversations. He asked questions about other people's lives instead of dominating discussions with stories about his own achievements. The changes were subtle but noticeable to anyone who knew him well. Stephanie's presence at family events became increasingly rare as the months passed. The lifestyle restrictions imposed by Marcus's reduced income were clearly straining their relationship beyond its breaking point. She had been attracted to the successful architect who could provide financial security and social status. The construction worker who lived in a modest apartment and brought lunch in a brown bag held considerably less appeal. Their breakup was inevitable and probably healthier for both of them. My own relationship with the house evolved gradually from symbol of justice to genuine home. Daniel and I spent weekends correcting the construction shortcuts and maintenance issues that Marcus had ignored or couldn't afford to address. The process of improving the property became a metaphor for rebuilding trust and creating something better from the wreckage of betrayal. Each repair we completed together strengthened both the house and our partnership. The wedding planning resumed 6 months after Marcus's eviction, but with a different perspective on what really mattered. The elaborate celebration we had originally envisioned was replaced by something more intimate and meaningful. The money recovered from selling furniture and belongings Marcus had purchased with my stolen funds provided a budget that prioritized meaningful experiences over impressive displays. Our guests were limited to people who had supported us through the crisis, creating a celebration focused on genuine relationships rather than social obligations. James Patterson handled the legal aspects of property transfer and restitution with the efficiency that had made him Dad's trusted advisor for decades. But he also provided insights into family dynamics that proved invaluable for navigating the complex emotions surrounding Marcus's punishment and potential redemption. His experience with similar cases offered perspective on how families could heal from financial betrayal while maintaining necessary boundaries and accountability measures. What you accomplished, James told me during one of our final meetings, was remarkable not just for its legal sophistication but for its psychological precision. You could have destroyed Marcus completely through criminal prosecution, but you chose consequences that created opportunities for genuine change and growth. That level of strategic thinking combined with emotional intelligence is rare in someone your age. His assessment helped me understand that the skills I had discovered during this crisis were not just useful for seeking justice but could be applied to building success in other areas of life. The consulting firm I had mentioned to Kate during my recovery was becoming a serious possibility as I realized how many people faced similar situations without the resources or knowledge to protect themselves effectively. The most unexpected development was the gradual improvement in my relationship with Dad. Robert Thompson had always been somewhat distant, focused on his business and uncomfortable with emotional conversations. But watching me navigate the legal and financial complexities of Marcus's betrayal had earned his respect in ways that years of being the obedient daughter never had. He began including me in business discussions and seeking my input on strategic decisions for the construction company. "You've got better instincts for this kind of problem solving than Marcus ever had," Dad admitted during a conversation about a difficult client situation. "Maybe when this whole mess is behind us, you should consider joining the business in a more formal capacity. We could use someone with your analytical skills and attention to detail." The invitation represented a fundamental shift in how he viewed my capabilities and potential contributions to the family legacy. Mom's reaction to the entire situation was more complicated, reflecting her natural tendency to prioritize family harmony over individual accountability. She struggled to accept that Marcus's punishment was both necessary and proportionate to his crimes. Her maternal instincts made her want to protect both of her children, even when one had victimized the other in such a devastating way. Our conversations about the situation were careful and sometimes tense, but they also forced us to develop a more honest and direct communication style. The extended family's response revealed character traits that had been hidden during easier times. Some relatives supported my demand for accountability and justice, recognizing that Marcus's actions could have destroyed Dad's business and multiple livelihoods. Others viewed my legal action as unnecessarily harsh, suggesting that family disputes should be resolved privately without involving lawyers and formal consequences. The divisions created lasting changes in our holiday gatherings and social interactions. Perhaps the most significant change was in my own self-perception and confidence. The woman who had woken up in a hospital bed to discover her wedding fund had been stolen was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood that trust required verification, that family loyalty demanded accountability, and that strategic thinking could be as powerful as any traditional weapon when used with precision and purpose. The house in Beaverton had become more than just compensation for theft. It represented proof that actions had consequences, that justice was possible even when betrayal came from trusted family members, and that victim status was a choice rather than a permanent condition. Marcus had thought he was stealing money from a helpless sister, but he had actually awakened capabilities that would define the rest of my life. As winter arrived and the first anniversary of my surgery approached, I found myself grateful for the crisis that had revealed so much about everyone's true character. The wedding fund theft had been devastating, but it had also been educational in ways that would protect me from future betrayals and position me for success I never would have imagined possible. Sometimes the worst experiences become the foundation for the most important growth. 2 years after Marcus vacated the Beaverton house, I stood in what had once been his master bedroom, now converted into my home office, reviewing quarterly reports for Thompson Financial Advisory Services. The irony of building my consulting firm in the space where my brother had planned his life with stolen money was not lost on me. The room that had once symbolized his betrayal had become the headquarters for helping other people protect themselves from similar financial exploitation. The business had grown beyond my most optimistic projections. What began as informal assistance to a few friends navigating difficult divorces had evolved into a comprehensive service helping people document assets, identify financial vulnerabilities, and develop protection strategies before crisis situations developed. The skills I had learned during my own family crisis proved remarkably transferable to other people's complex situations involving trust, money, and family dynamics. Kate had become my business partner, bringing her digital forensics expertise to cases involving hidden assets and financial deception. Together we had developed methodologies for uncovering fraud that were being adopted by law firms throughout the Pacific Northwest. Our client base included executives protecting themselves before contentious divorces, elderly people concerned about financial abuse by family members, and business owners investigating suspected embezzlement by trusted employees. The most rewarding cases involved situations similar to my own experience with Marcus. Adult children exploiting aging parents, siblings stealing from each other during medical crises, and spouses hiding assets before abandoning their families. Each successful resolution reinforced my belief that financial betrayal could be prevented or addressed effectively when victims had access to proper resources and strategic thinking. Daniel and I had married the previous spring in a ceremony that perfectly reflected our evolved priorities. The guest list included only people who had supported us through the difficult period after my surgery, creating an intimate celebration focused on genuine relationships rather than social obligations. The reception was held in the garden of our Beaverton house, with Kate serving as maid of honor and Dad walking me down an aisle lined with flowers we had grown ourselves. Marcus attended the wedding at my specific invitation, arriving alone and staying only for the ceremony itself. His presence was important for symbolic reasons, demonstrating that forgiveness was possible even when trust could not be fully restored. He looked healthier than he had in years, with the lean build that came from physical labor and the quieter demeanor that reflected genuine humility rather than calculated charm. The successful architect who had stolen my wedding fund was gone forever, replaced by someone more honest about his limitations and more appreciative of opportunities he had previously taken for granted. Stephanie had moved to Seattle 6 months after their breakup, reportedly working as an administrative assistant while pursuing a nursing degree. Her decision to completely reinvent her life suggested that the crisis had been educational for her as well, forcing her to confront the unsustainability of the lifestyle she had been pursuing with Marcus. Mutual friends reported that she spoke about the Beaverton house experience as a necessary wake-up call that had prevented her from making even more destructive financial decisions in the future. The restitution payments continued arriving monthly, now accompanied by brief notes from Marcus updating me on his progress and expressing gratitude for the second chance our family had provided. His messages were formal and somewhat stilted, but they revealed genuine reflection on the consequences of his actions and appreciation for the opportunity to rebuild his life through honest work. Dad reported that Marcus had been promoted to crew supervisor, a position that required managing both people and budgets, while maintaining the quality standards that had built Thompson Construction's reputation. Mom had gradually accepted that my legal action against Marcus had been necessary and proportionate, though she still struggled with the reality that her son had been capable of such calculated betrayal. Our relationship had evolved to include more honest conversations about difficult topics, replacing the superficial pleasantness that had characterized our interactions during easier times. She now served as an informal advisor to my consulting firm, offering insights into family psychology that proved valuable for understanding the emotional dimensions of financial disputes. Dad's invitation to join Thompson Construction in a formal capacity had led to my becoming the company's director of risk management and strategic planning. The position allowed me to apply my analytical skills to protecting the business from the kinds of vulnerabilities that Marcus's actions had revealed. More importantly, it provided opportunities to work closely with Dad on succession planning and business development, strengthening our relationship while ensuring the company's long-term viability. The construction industry had provided an unexpected education in the intersection of family relationships and business success. Many of Dad's competitors were family operations that had been destroyed by internal conflicts over money, inheritance, and management responsibilities. Our experience with Marcus had made both Dad and me acutely aware of how quickly trust could be shattered, and how important clear boundaries were for protecting both personal relationships and business interests. James Patterson had become a close family friend and trusted advisor, his guidance proving invaluable as I navigated the complex legal and ethical considerations involved in building my consulting practice. His experience with family disputes provided perspective on the patterns that led to financial betrayal and the interventions that were most effective for preventing or addressing such situations. Under his mentorship, I had begun speaking at legal conferences about asset protection strategies and family financial planning. The house itself had been completely transformed through 2 years of careful renovation and improvement. Daniel's engineering background had guided us through structural upgrades that addressed the foundation issues and HVAC problems that Marcus had ignored. My business income had funded aesthetic improvements that reflected our personal taste rather than the developer's focus on superficial appeal. The property that had been purchased with stolen money had become a genuine home that we had created together through honest work and shared vision. Our relationship had been strengthened rather than damaged by the crisis we had weathered together. Daniel's unwavering support during my medical emergency and the subsequent legal proceedings had demonstrated his character in ways that normal circumstances never could have revealed. The stress of canceled wedding plans and financial uncertainty had tested our partnership thoroughly, proving that we could handle whatever challenges married life might present. The most unexpected development had been the gradual healing of my relationship with Marcus. The brother who had stolen my wedding fund while I fought for my life was slowly being replaced by someone capable of genuine remorse and sustained effort toward redemption. Our interactions remained formal and somewhat guarded, but they included acknowledgement of past wrongs and commitment to building something better going forward. Forgiveness had proven to be a process rather than a single decision, requiring time and evidence of change rather than just good intentions. The extended family dynamics had eventually stabilized around the new reality of Marcus's reduced circumstances and my enhanced status within the Thompson family hierarchy. Some relatives continued to view my legal action as unnecessarily harsh, but others had come to appreciate that accountability was necessary for preventing future destructions. Holiday gatherings were more honest and less superficial than they had been before the crisis, with genuine conversations replacing polite small talk about topics that mattered to no one. My consulting firm's success had attracted attention from larger organizations interested in acquiring our methodologies and client base. The offers were substantial and tempting, but I had decided to maintain independence in order to preserve the personal attention and customized service that had built our reputation. The goal was to help people protect themselves from financial betrayal, not to maximize profits by standardizing solutions that might not address individual circumstances effectively. The most rewarding aspect of my work was the prevention cases, where early intervention avoided the kind of devastating family conflicts that had characterized my own experience with Marcus. Elderly clients who established clear financial boundaries before cognitive decline made them vulnerable to exploitation. Married couples who created transparent asset documentation before relationship problems developed into acrimonious divorce proceedings. Business partners who implemented oversight mechanisms before trust issues evolved into embezzlement situations. Each successful prevention case represented a family that would be spared the kind of trauma and relationship damage that financial betrayal invariably created. The consulting fees I charged were modest compared to the legal costs and emotional devastation that such conflicts generated when they were allowed to develop without intervention. Most clients viewed our services as insurance policies that they hoped never to need, but were grateful to have in place. The personal growth I had experienced during the 2 years since Marcus's theft had been profound and multifaceted. The naive woman who had trusted family members without verification had been replaced by someone who understood that healthy relationships required clear boundaries and accountability measures. Trust was no longer assumed but earned through consistent behavior over time. Love was demonstrated through actions rather than words, and family loyalty demanded honesty rather than blind support. Daniel often commented on how the crisis had revealed capabilities and character traits that normal circumstances never would have brought to light. The analytical thinking and strategic planning abilities that had enabled me to seek justice effectively were now being applied to building business success and helping other people protect themselves. The woman who had woken up in a hospital bed to discover her wedding fund had been stolen had transformed into someone capable of preventing similar betrayals from happening to others. The consulting firm's reputation had led to speaking engagements at conferences for financial planners, estate attorneys, and family therapists. The audiences were typically professionals who worked with clients facing complex family and financial situations, seeking tools and strategies for preventing or addressing betrayal and exploitation. My presentations focused on the practical steps that could be taken to protect assets and relationships before crisis situations developed. The most frequently asked question during these presentations was whether I regretted taking legal action against my own brother rather than pursuing family mediation or informal resolution. My answer was always the same. Marcus's theft had been premeditated and systematic, exploiting my medical emergency in ways that demonstrated a complete disregard for family bonds and basic human decency. Informal resolution would have enabled him to avoid consequences while learning nothing about the devastating impact of his actions. The legal accountability we had insisted upon had forced Marcus to confront the reality of what he had done and commit to sustained effort toward making amends. Without formal consequences and oversight, his expressions of remorse would have been meaningless, and his promises of repayment would have been empty. Sometimes the most loving thing family members could do was insist on accountability rather than enabling continued destructive behavior through misguided loyalty. The second anniversary of my appendectomy arrived with little fanfare but significant reflection on how much had changed since that medical emergency had revealed my brother's true character. The woman who had been rushed to surgery with a life-threatening condition had been vulnerable and trusting, assuming that family members would protect rather than exploit her during a crisis. The woman who now ran a successful consulting firm and owned valuable real estate understood that protection required vigilance and that trust had to be earned rather than assumed. Marcus's transformation during those 2 years had been equally dramatic, though in the opposite direction from my own evolution. The confident professional who had stolen $45,000 from his unconscious sister had been humbled by consequences that stripped away the superficial markers of success he had prioritized above relationships and integrity. The construction worker who now sent monthly restitution payments was more honest about his limitations and more appreciative of opportunities he had previously taken for granted. Dad's assessment of Marcus's progress was cautiously optimistic, noting genuine changes in work ethic and attitude that suggested the possibility of eventual redemption. But he also emphasized that trust would have to be rebuilt gradually through consistent behavior over years rather than months. The son who had nearly destroyed the family business through fraud and theft would have to prove himself worthy of increased responsibility through sustained excellence in basic tasks. Mom's healing from the trauma of discovering her son's capacity for betrayal had been slower and more complicated, requiring professional counseling and significant changes in how she related to both of her adult children. The mother who had once assumed her children would always support each other had learned to recognize warning signs of financial irresponsibility and manipulation. Her conversations with both Marcus and me now included more direct questions and honest feedback rather than the superficial pleasantness that had characterized our interactions before the crisis. The house that Marcus had purchased with my stolen money had become the foundation for building the life Daniel and I had envisioned when we first started planning our marriage. The property that had been acquired through betrayal and fraud was being transformed into something better through honest work and shared commitment. Each improvement we made together strengthened both our home and our partnership, creating value that could never be stolen or destroyed by family members who prioritized their own needs above basic decency. The consulting firm's growth had created opportunities to expand beyond individual client services into training programs for professionals who worked with families facing complex financial situations. Law firms, accounting practices, and financial planning organizations were seeking education about identifying and preventing the kinds of exploitation that had characterized Marcus's theft. The methodologies Kate and I had developed were being adopted by practitioners throughout the region, creating a network of professionals equipped to protect their clients from family financial betrayal. Looking toward the future, I felt grateful for the crisis that had revealed so much about character and relationships while providing opportunities for growth that normal circumstances never could have created. The wedding fund theft had been devastating at the time, but it had also been educational in ways that would protect me from future betrayals while positioning me for success I never would have imagined possible. Sometimes the worst experiences became the foundation for the most important development. The woman who had once trusted family members without question had learned to verify claims and document agreements while maintaining capacity for genuine relationships with people who earned such trust through consistent behavior. The victim, who had woken up in a hospital bed to discover her life savings had been stolen, had transformed into someone capable of preventing similar betrayals from happening to others while building business success from the skills learned during her own crisis. Marcus would continue paying restitution for several more years, each monthly payment serving as a reminder of the consequences that followed from exploiting family trust for personal gain. But he would also continue rebuilding his life through honest work and genuine effort toward making amends, creating the possibility that our family relationships could eventually be restored to something healthier than what had existed before his betrayal revealed the need for clearer boundaries and stronger accountability measures. The story that had begun with theft and betrayal during a medical emergency had evolved into something larger about the importance of consequences, the possibility of redemption, and the value of strategic thinking when facing complex family situations. The house that Marcus had bought with stolen money had become the headquarters for helping other people protect themselves from similar exploitation, transforming a symbol of betrayal into a tool for prevention and justice. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.